Welcome to Fortress of Faith with Tom Wallace, calling North America to repentance and revival.
Well, we're back once again at the corner of truth and courage. Thank you for joining us here today. This is Tom Wallace. I want to continue on with this discussion about Islamic terrorism. As we woke up to this new year of 2025, we were greeted by the attack in New Orleans. If you were born after 2001, your whole world has been so familiar with Islamic terrorism, but also it reaches further back. I remember back in the 70s and the attacks and the growth of Islamic terrorism, and especially in 79 coming out of Iran and the attack of the Jewish, what Olympics was that? I'm not sure what year that was in Germany and Munich, and the disaster that happened there. You know, this has almost become so common. You know, we don't blush, we don't get angry. It's almost like we just expect it. We don't want it, but it's almost become the norm, and that's sad. And so, as I've been trying to warn my colleagues and my friends here in the West, back home, of I think the growing issue of fundamental Islam, we need to be better equipped and better acquainted with it. And so I want to talk today about how do you radicalize a Muslim? You know, because we talk about this, an American soldier, he was a homegrown terrorist, converted to Islam, and joined ISIS, the Islamic State, one of the most cruelest terrorist organizations on the face of the earth. They're still operating. It's now known as ISIS-K. They've kind of broken up, but they are still recruiting people online, overseas, like we just saw. So how do you radicalize a person like that? Well, first of all, I'm going to give you 10 points. And this is something that I and my former partner on the radio, Shahram Hadi, and Shahram is a former Muslim from Iran. And, you know, it's one thing for you to hear about this from a guy who was a missionary overseas and has been studying and dealing with Muslims for 2-3 decades now. But it's another thing to hear it from someone who is a former Muslim himself, who came out of it and came to Christ, got gloriously saved, and is now a preacher of the gospel. And he and I set out these 10 steps. And I believe that our security analysts, those that are part of Homeland Security, should pay attention to these steps. I wish they would. Unfortunately, many that are guided by the government are not getting the best view. They've kicked out great people like John Guandolo. He wrote the handbook on the Muslim Brotherhood. And during the Obama administration, they kicked him and many, many, many others who profiled Muslims. And I've taken all his courses, John Guandolo's courses, and they fit very much in line with my studies as well. We've developed a good friendship through the years. And he still teaches at the War College, but he still tells me that, you know, the truth is there's a lot of resistance in the government against his teachings and his insights. But I'm going to give you now 10 steps. But before I do, I got to establish one thing. We use the word radicalize. That's the government word. That's the media term for a Muslim who was what they call a normal, moderate, peace-loving Muslim, but somehow was turned to hate and bringing the work of God by extremism or radicalization and stuff. We need to stop using those words. I only use them because that's the word that everyone's familiar with. The truth is, these people have been fundamentalized. The Islamic word would be Salafiism. And basically, they have been returning back to the foundations, the fundamentals of their religion. You need to understand that the Ottoman Empire, for its rule of the Islamic world for the last 600 years, moderated the religion, made it more peaceful, more gentle. They kind of took the sword and left it in the 7th century and only taught peaceful passages of the Quran and not the sword and the jihadism and all that stuff. But when the Ottoman Empire closed in the end of World War I, it gave the fundamentalists, the Salafists, the opportunity to regain the Islamic world and bring it back to its fundamental teachings. Now, I'm a Christian. I describe myself with pride. Well, I don't know if pride's the right word, but I'm not ashamed in any way to describe myself as a fundamentalist. I am a fundamentalist. But let me say this. The closer I get to God and God's ways and God's instructions of the Holy Bible, the more loving a person will become. The more dedicated and closer a person gets to the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, the more hateful they'll become, and the more likelihood that they would be involved in terrorism, would have the courage to do so. Now, there are fortunately small numbers of Muslims who are fundamentalized, not radicalized, but fundamentalist. Radical means it's something outside of the norm. Something that's, overextended, it's just radical. It's not normal. Well, it's radical to us, but to Muhammad and the real face of Islam, it's not radical. That's just what it is. And so let's get into some of the steps. We're going to cover them over the next couple of days. Step number one, establish that Muhammad is God's final prophet. No one's going to come behind him and give you different rules. He was the last prophet to set everything straight. And so he is God's spokesperson for mankind. And so that has to be established in the heart of a Muslim. If he's going to be fundamentalized, he has to believe that truly, faithfully, without any divergence, no exceptions. You cannot add another prophet into the system, and there are today in the Muslim world, like the Ahmadiyans. They have a prophet that lives in London. You've got the NOI, the Nation of Islam, the black Muslim community here in America that basically is a gang, and it's a racist gang that uses Islam as a cloak. They've got Elijah Muhammad, who founded them, and Louis Farrakhan, who's their leader today. Although they don't say that he necessarily is a prophet, but what he says goes. It's almost as close as. A fundamental Muslim will only accept the Prophet Muhammad of the 7th century as God's final prophet. Okay, number 2, establish that the Quran is God's holy words and that the Sunnah, which was Muhammad's teachings and by his lips and by his actions, are God's ways. The Quran is the final authority without error. Everything it says, you believe and you don't question. Don't dare question it. Don't dare, suggest that, well, maybe error crept in here, or we're not quite sure what he meant by that when he said this. No. A fundamental Muslim, if you're going to so-called radicalize them, like the world wants to call it, radicalize. If you want to fundamentalize them, establish that Muhammad is the final prophet and the Quran is the final word of God, and that Muhammad's teachings from his lips and his actions are the Sunnah, the pathway. You have to follow it. He's the perfect example. And if you're going to have God's pleasure, you will do as he did. if he had sex with children, and therefore it's okay to have sex with children. If he killed and slaughtered the infidel, then it's okay for you to slaughter the infidel, and so on. Basically, you have an authority, and that's an important issue. In other words, I'm not living by my authority. I'm not doing what I think I should do. I'm doing what God tells me to do. If you're going to fundamentalize a Muslim, that's how he has to be. He has to adopt that thinking. In other words, his actions are guided only by a higher authority. The third of 10 steps to fundamentalize a Muslim, establish that Allah as the sole God of the universe and his law, the Sharia, as perfect and higher than any law of man. So the law, the Sharia, is higher than man's law. If man has laws, that's fine. But if they differ from God's laws, the Sharia, they will follow. And man's laws will always be inferior. So there's a superior law and authority that they will hold to. So therefore, if we call something innocent and Allah calls it guilty or filth or vile or wrong, what side do you think they're going to take? They're going to take Allah's side. So these are the foundational steps. I think I got time for number 4. Establish that the only way to contentment is to be fully submitted to Allah's law and his will. If you're going to be content in this world, if you're going to find happiness, if you're going to find true purpose in this world, you will only find it by being truly submitted to Allah's law and his will. You see, the whole idea of Islam means submission. That's what it means, submit. When one is submitted, we call them a Muslim. It's not been until the last 150 years that we've been calling the followers of Muhammad Muslim. They normally didn't go by that term. They normally were known as Mohammedans. Other terms might have been given to them there, but the term Muslim became really popular about 150 years ago. And the idea is that they're drilling down on the idea that you're to be submitted. If you are a follower of Allah, then you're submitted to Allah. You are a Muslim, the submitted one. And so it subjugates you from your will to God's will. And if you're going to have contentment, if you're going to have peace, if you're going to have happiness, if you're going to have any purpose in life or prosperity, then you must submit to a higher law and will. And that is God's law, the Sharia, and the will of Allah. And how do you do it? You follow the example of the Prophet Muhammad. All right, we're going to have to stop there. But I hope you'll join us again tomorrow as we get into the other 6 steps of how to radicalize, or rather fundamentalize, a Muslim. So join us then at the corner of Truth and Courage. God bless you.